My girlfriend once told me, "I love you, but I'm not ready for the boring couple life. I want to enjoy myself before settling down with someone safe like you." So I gave her exactly what she asked for, the freedom to do whatever she wanted, and I moved forward with my life without her. A few months later, she suddenly decided she wanted us back. Hey Reddit, after 4 years together, my girlfriend told me she needed to feel young and wild before eventually settling down with me. She seemed to believe I would simply wait around until she was ready to return, but she completely lost it when she realized I had already moved on. Let me explain how everything unfolded. I'm a 32-year-old guy, and I had been with Tiffany, who's 29, for 4 years, genuinely believing we were building a real future together. We met at a point in our lives when we both had our act together. I work as an insurance claims adjuster in Charlotte, and she was in marketing for a tech company. The first 3 years were amazing, the kind of relationship other people admired. We took weekend trips to Asheville, went hiking, and had real conversations during dinner instead of staring at our phones like everyone else. On Saturdays she would bring me coffee in bed, and I'd surprise her with concert tickets, the normal couple stuff that somehow still felt meaningful. She was incredibly smart, funny, and driven. She would actually get excited hearing about the fraud cases I dealt with at work, which, apparently, makes catching insurance scammers sound impressive when you're still enthusiastic about life. I'd help her brainstorm marketing campaigns, and I loved watching her nail client presentations. We really felt like a team. After about 18 months, we moved in together and found a great place in the Valentine area. A 2-bedroom apartment with a decent kitchen and enough room for both our belongings without feeling cramped. Tiffany decorated it so well it looked like something out of a magazine, yet it still felt warm and lived in. Weeknights were spent cooking together, binge-watching shows on Netflix, and talking about the future, like getting a dog once we bought a house. By that point, I had already been thinking seriously about marriage for over a year. It wasn't some desperate urge to lock things down. It was simply the feeling that I couldn't imagine life without her. She felt like the one, all those cheesy thoughts that sound ridiculous until you're actually living them. Then around the 3rd year, things started to change. She began spending more time scrolling through Instagram, often showing me posts from her single friends going out to clubs, but there was a kind of wistful tone in her voice that hadn't been there before. Soon she started complaining that our routine had become boring. I tried suggesting new things like dancing classes, rock climbing, or visiting new places on weekends, but nothing seemed to fix whatever was bothering her. 2 people, in particular, seemed to be fueling the shift in her mindset. The first was her sister Ruth. I used to think Ruth was cool, but lately she'd been filling Tiffany's head with all sorts of toxic ideas about needing to experience everything before settling down. It was ironic advice coming from someone whose longest relationship lasted barely 6 months. Ruth would meet Tiffany for weekly coffee dates and bring along endless Tinder horror stories, telling her she was wasting her youth acting like an old married woman. The second influence was Brianna, Tiffany's new 23-year-old coworker who treated the Charlotte nightlife scene like it was her personal playground. Brianna constantly posted attention-seeking photos online with captions about living your truth and never settling, and she started dragging Tiffany out to girls' nights regularly. Meanwhile, my best friend Hunter, who has known me since middle school, saw through everything immediately. Our friendship is the kind where we can relentlessly tease each other but would still defend each other without hesitation. One night during a gaming session while Tiffany was out again with her friends, Hunter paused our RPG right in the middle of a boss fight and said, "Dude, your girlfriend is having a midlife crisis at 28. That's actually impressive." I tried to brush it off, saying she was probably just figuring things out, but Hunter didn't sugarcoat his response. He told me it sounded more like she was figuring out how many guys she could sample before settling down with the dependable option. He also warned me that when someone starts acting like being with you feels like a prison sentence, it might be time to start thinking about your own exit plan. Even though the warning signs were obvious, I convinced myself it was just a phase. After all, everyone questions their life choices sometimes, right? I believed that if I stayed consistent and remained the same person she had fallen in love with, she would eventually snap out of it. I was wrong. In hindsight, 2 particular incidents should have made everything clear, but when you've invested 4 years in a relationship and are already planning a proposal, It's easy to convince yourself that rough patches are simply obstacles to overcome. The first warning came during Tiffany's 28th birthday, which happened to fall on a Friday. I planned what I thought would be a perfect evening, dinner at the restaurant where we had our very first date, followed by surprise tickets to see an indie band she had been obsessed with lately. It was thoughtful, personal, and romantic, at least in my mind. But during dinner she seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone and answering me with short responses. When I finally gave her the concert tickets, hoping it would lift her mood, she barely glanced at them. That's when I found out she had already made plans with Brianna and her friends for the night and simply hadn't bothered to tell me. Instead of the evening I had planned, we ended up at some trendy bar in South End where the drinks cost more than most people earn in an hour. Eventually I just drove home alone while she stayed out partying until 3 in the morning, and when she finally returned in an Uber, she collapsed on the couch and fell asleep without saying a single word to me. The next morning she behaved as if nothing had happened, casually saying, "Thanks for a great birthday, babe," like the embarrassment from the night before didn't even exist. Then, about 3 weeks later, Tiffany had her company's holiday party, an event I had attended with her every year for the past 3 years, always being introduced proudly as her boyfriend while we mingled together. This time felt different from the moment we walked in. She immediately found Brianna and started treating me more like the guy who drove her there than her actual date. When she introduced me to people I hadn't met before, she simply called me Ryan without explaining who I was or why I was there. At one point her boss asked how long we had been together, and Tiffany just laughed and said we weren't putting labels on anything right now. That comment hit hard, considering we had been together 4 years and living together for 2.5, sharing a lease and a home where my toothbrush sat right next to hers. Yet apparently we weren't labeling anything. Then a new guy named Derek showed up, some hotshot account manager around 26 with one of those man buns that suggests his best years were in college. He spent the entire evening hovering around Tiffany, complimenting her, bringing her drinks, and joking about work topics I had no part in, and she seemed to enjoy every bit of the attention. Whenever I tried to join the conversation, Derek would steer things back toward office talk that left me standing there with nothing to add. When I suggested we dance, Tiffany brushed me off, saying she was busy networking, and when I asked if she wanted to step outside for some air, she told me to stop hovering over her. The drive home was quiet until we pulled into the parking garage. When I casually mentioned that Derek seemed like a nice guy, trying to gauge her reaction, she smiled and said he was really adventurous and made her realize how much she still hadn't experienced in life. That night I lay next to someone who already seemed emotionally gone, and instead of accepting that reality and planning my exit, I started trying to figure out how to become the kind of exciting person she seemed to want. I began searching for rock climbing gyms and other adventurous activities, convincing myself that if I changed enough, maybe things would go back to how they were. My friend Hunter called me while I was deep into one of those late-night searches for fun couple activities and asked why I was awake at 2 in the morning looking up skydiving lessons. I told him I was trying to be more spontaneous, but he stopped me and said if someone makes you feel like you have to become a completely different person just to keep them interested, then that person probably isn't meant for you, and he reminded me that I'm terrified of heights anyway. Meanwhile, the engagement ring sitting in my sock drawer seemed to feel heavier every day, but I kept convincing myself we were just going through a rough phase. In reality, I was pouring effort into saving something that had already died. The conversation that finally ended everything happened on a Tuesday night in March. I had just finished reviewing a complicated fraud case when Tiffany sat down in front of me with that familiar expression people get when they're about to say something life-changing. She began a speech that clearly sounded rehearsed, explaining that she had never really lived and needed to experience what it felt like to be young and free before settling down with someone safe like me. That word, safe, stuck with me. Apparently Ruth and Brianna had both been telling her she was wasting her best years acting like she was already married, and she believed she needed to get certain experiences out of her system before she could truly appreciate what I offered. The entitlement behind that idea was unbelievable. Essentially, she wanted the freedom to try out other men while keeping me waiting like a backup plan she could return to whenever she felt ready. I asked her directly what she was really saying, and she told me she thought we should take a break, quickly adding that it wasn't forever, just until she figured things out. She said she needed to know what else was out there, so she could come back to me without regrets and enjoy life before settling into what she called the boring couple routine. Somehow she had convinced herself that this plan was actually beneficial for our relationship, as if spending time with other guys would make her appreciate dependable old me more. When I repeated her idea back to her plainly, asking if she expected me to wait around while she tested other men to see whether I was still her best option, she struggled to respond at first but then insisted that if I truly loved her, I would want her to be completely certain about us. She said it might take 6 months or maybe even a year, however long it took for her to figure things out. In other words, she expected me to put my entire life on hold for up to a year while she explored her options and decided whether I was still worth choosing. I asked if that meant we were breaking up with the possibility of getting back together later if her other plans didn't work out. But she insisted it wasn't a breakup, just space for her to grow as a person while dating other people and exploring her choices. At least by that point she was being honest about it. I sat there staring at the woman I had been planning to propose to in just 3 weeks. The ring was literally sitting about 20 feet away, waiting for the moment I had planned, a moment that clearly was never going to happen now. For years of building a relationship I believed was real, stable, and worth protecting, and she was ready to risk all of it just to see if life might be more exciting somewhere else, fully expecting I would still be around whenever she decided to return. I simply said, "Okay." She looked almost surprised, like she had expected me to argue or fight for her. I told her if she needed space to figure things out, then she had it and she could take all the time she wanted. What I had already realized in that moment was that the woman I fell in love with was gone, replaced by someone who viewed me less like a partner and more like a safe long-term investment she could fall back on later. That same night, she packed a bag and went to stay with her sister Ruth while we sorted out the rest. After she left, I sat alone in our apartment and pulled the ring box out of my sock drawer. $8,000 and 3 months of planning had gone into a future that apparently never truly existed. The very next day I returned the ring and got every dollar back, and instead of letting that money sit there reminding me of what could have been, I spent it on something I had always wanted, building the ultimate gaming setup with a top-tier graphics card, custom cooling, and everything else to make it a monster of a machine. Tiffany used to complain constantly that my old computer was too loud and took up too much space, but now I had a system that could run anything at maximum settings. Hunter came over to help me assemble it, and he didn't even mention Tiffany leaving. He just showed up with drinks and tools for organizing cables and got straight to work. While installing the new graphics card with the focus of a surgeon, he looked at the setup and joked that the thing probably had enough power to run NASA simulations. When he asked about the cooling system and I told him it had a custom loop with dual radiators, he laughed and said at least the machine would be silent, unlike my love life. Then he paused and added that maybe this was actually a good thing, because now we could finally finish the co-op campaign we had been putting off without anyone complaining that we were ignoring her. Around the same time, I also got a dog, something I had wanted for years but never did because Tiffany always claimed she was allergic. As it turns out, she wasn't allergic at all, she just didn't want the responsibility. I found a 2-year-old German Shepherd mix at a rescue who was already house-trained, and I named him Ziggy. Getting a dog changed everything. He forced me to wake up early for walks, gave me a reason to explore new trails around the city, and honestly turned out to be the best wingman I could ask for. For the first time in months, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: relief. The morning after Tiffany left, I sat with my coffee and realized how quiet my mind felt. There was no more walking on eggshells, no more trying to be entertaining enough to keep her interested, and no more dealing with someone else's quarter-life crisis. Within a week I had joined a boxing gym in South End, a real gym where people went to train hard, hit things, and get stronger, the kind of place that smelled like sweat and leather instead of air freshener. The owner, Mike, was a 50-year-old former Marine who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and ran the gym with a simple philosophy: show up, work hard, improve, or leave. He introduced me to the regulars there, including Tommy the firefighter, Marcus the software engineer, and Big Jim the construction foreman. These were the kind of guys who didn't sit around overanalyzing their feelings. They showed up, trained hard, and pushed each other to get better. I started going every day after work, and the physical exhaustion helped more than anything else because it gave me something to focus on besides Tiffany's betrayal. At the same time, I began taking my regular workouts much more seriously. Instead of casually going to Planet Fitness like I had for years, I focused on proper lifting with deadlifts, squats, and bench presses. I cleaned up my diet, tracked my macros, and started treating my body like something that deserved real care and discipline. Within a few months, the change was obvious. I had always been in decent shape before, but now I was genuinely strong. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I was finally putting effort into myself instead of spending my energy managing someone else's emotions. Through all of this, Hunter stayed my regular gaming partner. After my workouts, he would show up at my place with takeout, and we would jump into whatever new game had just been released. He had this incredible ability to turn everything into a joke, even on days when I felt off. One night, while we were waiting for a match to load, he looked at me and said I was getting seriously jacked and reminded me how I used to struggle just to open a jar of pickles, while now I looked like I could deadlift a car. I told him hitting things at the boxing gym was surprisingly therapeutic, and he laughed and said I shouldn't get too huge because some of us still needed to feel masculine around each other, before immediately correcting himself and saying I should get enormous so people would assume he had hired me as his bodyguard. At some point, he also created a group chat with me, Tommy, Marcus, and Big Jim called Ryan's Glow Up Committee, and the messages in that chat were nonstop jokes mixed with encouragement. Hunter kept asking whether I had posted another shirtless gym photo yet because apparently the women of Charlotte needed to know what they were missing. Tommy joked that I would soon need a bigger doorway to fit through. Marcus suggested I start an OnlyFans account called Insurance Adjusters Gone Wild. And Big Jim just summed it all up by saying everyone in the chat was an idiot but that I was definitely winning the breakup. Meanwhile, Tiffany had started documenting what she called her journey of self-discovery all over Instagram. Her posts were usually from clubs in Noda, almost always with Brianna and Derek from her office, who had apparently become her guide to this exciting new single lifestyle. But there was something forced about those posts, like she was trying to convince herself as much as everyone else that she was truly living her best life. My social media, on the other hand, was showing a completely different story. Instead of the sad, heartbroken version of me people might have expected, my Instagram was full of boxing training clips, gym selfies where it was obvious I was getting stronger, and weekend hiking trips with the guys. According to Ruth, who started calling me occasionally, probably trying to gather information for her sister, Tiffany couldn't understand why I seemed so happy without her. She had apparently assumed I would be miserable. About 6 weeks after everything ended, Tiffany began reaching out. At first the messages were casual, just checking in to see how I was doing, bringing up old memories, or sending pictures of places we used to visit together. But the truth was I had actually gotten busy with my life. When she texted asking if I wanted to grab coffee and catch up, I was getting ready for sparring practice. When she suggested we watch our favorite show together like we used to, I was busy meal prepping and planning my training schedule. One Tuesday night around 10 she called, but I was out with the boxing guys grabbing dinner after training. During one of those calls she told me I sounded different and asked if I was seeing someone, and I simply told her I was just living my life. That straightforward answer seemed to completely throw her off because she had clearly expected me to stay frozen in place, waiting while she went out and explored her options before eventually returning to the safe choice. About 3 months into her so-called journey, things started falling apart for her. Not just in the increasingly forced tone of her social media posts, but also in the nervous calls Ruth began making. Derek, the guy who had originally caught her attention, lasted about 3 weeks before showing who he really was. He was 26, living with roommates in a cheap apartment near the university, and his idea of adventure was getting high and playing Xbox until 3 in the morning even on work nights. Whenever Tiffany suggested doing something different, like going somewhere new instead of hanging around dive bars or his gaming setup, he would complain that she was ruining the vibe. On top of that, he openly flirted with other women right in front of her and kept insisting he wasn't ready for anything exclusive despite the way he had pursued her at the beginning. Eventually he disappeared for a week, then reappeared at a company happy hour with a 22-year-old intern, leaving Tiffany to watch him make out with someone else, while her coworkers awkwardly pretended not to notice. After Derek came Brad, a personal trainer who looked impressive at first but quickly turned out to be nothing but trouble. He was so obsessed with his own body that he would cancel dates just to squeeze in extra gym sessions, constantly criticized Tiffany's eating habits, told her she needed to tighten up her routine, and insisted they split every expense even though he earned twice as much as she did. He also flirted openly with other women at the gym, and when Tiffany confronted him about it, he accused her of being insecure and clingy and claimed he needed space to focus on his fitness goals, which really meant he had already found someone else he preferred. Then there was Troy, the artsy type she met at an art gallery opening who borrowed $60 from her on their second date to pay for drinks, and then spent the evening lecturing her about how traditional relationships were just outdated social constructs. Troy lasted about a month before Tiffany discovered he had been hooking up with one of her own friends. Each of these experiences seemed to hit her harder because she had already burned so many bridges chasing this new lifestyle. She had spent weeks bragging to people about how much better life was now that she wasn't stuck with boring, predictable Ryan, only to end up dealing with guys who probably wouldn't have lasted a week in my world. Her friend group also fell apart in dramatic fashion. Brianna, the same person who had encouraged Tiffany to embrace her freedom, turned out to be the worst kind of friend once Tiffany started getting attention from men. When Tiffany began seeing Troy, Brianna suddenly started spreading rumors about him, claiming she had heard questionable things about his reputation. The truth came out later when Tiffany walked in on Brianna hooking up with Troy at a house party. Brianna's defense was simply that Tiffany had said they weren't exclusive and she was just having fun. After that, their entire social circle split into sides, and most people sided with Brianna because she was younger, more attractive, and tended to bring more guys to gatherings. Tiffany ended up pushed out of group chats, left off party invitations, and basically shut out from the very social scene she had sacrificed our relationship to join. Meanwhile, my life kept improving week after week. Boxing had become something I genuinely loved. I had moved from just hitting heavy bags to actual sparring sessions, and Mike was constantly working with me on improving my technique, footwork, and combinations. The confidence that came from that progress was incredible. But the real turning point in my personal life was meeting Haley. I met her at the regular gym where I lifted weights. She was a veterinarian, 30 years old, and had recently moved to Charlotte from Raleigh. She was smart, funny, had a sharp, sarcastic sense of humor, and was genuinely attractive. More importantly, she respected the dedication I was putting into my training. Haley also had her own apartment, her own routine, and a full life with interests and hobbies that didn't revolve around me. Turned out Haley was a gamer too, and not casually either. She had an impressive PC setup and could trash talk better than most of the guys I knew. We started working out together regularly, and sometimes grabbing coffee after the gym would turn into dinner, which then turned into gaming sessions at her place. Everything about it felt effortless in a way that was completely unfamiliar after spending 4 years constantly feeling like I had to be careful about every little thing. When Hunter first met her during one of our gaming nights at my place, I was a little nervous about how it would go. Hunter has absolutely no filter around new people, and the last thing I wanted was for him to scare off someone I actually liked. He sat down in his usual spot on the couch and looked at her before saying, "So you're the veterinarian? Ryan told me you can actually beat him at Call of Duty, and I'm going to need to see proof of that." Haley didn't miss a beat, grabbing a controller and replying that she didn't just beat me. She completely destroyed me, though she warned us she talked a lot of trash while playing. Hunter immediately grinned and said he already liked her. 3 hours later, after she had absolutely demolished both of us in every game we tried, Hunter pulled me aside and admitted she was genuinely cool, not the kind of person pretending to be cool just to get male attention. He also pointed out that the fact she was better than me at games was both hilarious and weirdly attractive. The difference between Haley and Tiffany was obvious in every way. Haley respected my commitment to training and saw it as discipline rather than obsession. She found my work in insurance interesting because of the stories about catching fraudsters, and she liked that I was building new skills and friendships instead of seeing my interests as competition for attention. With Tiffany, I had always felt like I was constantly auditioning to prove I was worthy of being her boyfriend, but with Haley I could just be myself, and that seemed to be more than enough. Around the same time, Tiffany's messages started becoming more frequent and far less subtle. What began as simple "How are you?" texts gradually turned into obvious attempts to stir up nostalgia, mentioning things like how she missed our Sunday cooking sessions or how our favorite anniversary restaurant had a special that reminded her of me. Then everything changed when she saw the Instagram post that apparently broke her brain. I had shared a photo from a hiking trip with Haley and Ziggy. It wasn't even a romantic couple picture, just the three of us standing at a scenic overlook. Haley looked amazing in that natural way, relaxed, smiling, completely comfortable being herself, which was the exact opposite of the overly staged club photos Tiffany had been posting. Within an hour, my phone was flooded with angry messages demanding to know who this basic girl was, accusing her of being fake and pretending to be someone she wasn't, and questioning why I was seriously spending time with some random gym girl instead of focusing on fixing things between us. When I showed the messages to Hunter, his reaction was immediate. He told me we needed to save every single one because the level of craziness was approaching restraining order territory, and he also said it would probably be hilarious to look back on someday when I was happily married to someone who wasn't completely unhinged. About 6 months after Tiffany had left to find herself, she called again. This time with a tone that made it obvious she had come to a decision and expected everything to fall into place around it. She asked if we could meet for dinner to have a serious conversation about us. I agreed, partly because I was curious about what she had to say and partly because I had genuinely moved on by that point. When she walked into the restaurant in Plaza Midwood that Thursday night, the difference in her was clear right away. She looked the same physically, but the confident energy she used to have was gone, replaced by someone who seemed tired, unsure, and maybe even a little desperate. We ordered food and made small talk for a while, but I could tell she was building up to something. Eventually, she took a deep breath and launched into what sounded like a carefully rehearsed speech. She said the past few months had been eye-opening and that she had learned a lot about herself and what truly mattered in life. She apologized for hurting me but explained that she needed to explore those feelings rather than suppress them and risk resenting me later, somehow still framing the entire situation as if it had been beneficial for our relationship. According to her, everything she experienced during that time had only confirmed what she supposedly already knew deep down, that I was the person she truly wanted to build a life with. She told me she was ready now to commit fully and start talking about marriage, children, and buying a house together, presenting the whole thing as if it were a reward I had been patiently waiting to receive. In her mind, she had simply gotten all the wild experiences out of her system and could now genuinely appreciate the stability I offered. She kept repeating how grateful she was that I had been patient and understanding about what she needed to do, even saying that I had been right to wait for her. With a smile that probably would have worked on me 6 months earlier, she told me she knew it must have been difficult but that this was exactly why we were perfect together, because I was stable and reliable, and now she knew for certain that was what she wanted. She talked about how we could just pick up where we left off and that everything would be even better now that she had resolved all her doubts. And while saying this, she actually reached across the table and squeezed my hand as if we were already back together. As if that dinner was nothing more than a formality before we simply resumed the relationship where we had left off. She even started talking about future plans, saying she had been thinking that maybe we should move somewhere bigger and perhaps start looking at houses in Myers Park since she knew I had been saving money and her career was taking off. She casually mentioned that we could even be engaged by Christmas if we wanted, as though she had already mapped out our future during the Uber ride over. I listened to her entire speech without interrupting, watching the woman who had once been the center of my world try to reclaim a place in my life that no longer existed. When she finally finished, I sat quietly for a moment, surprised by how different I felt sitting across from her now. Then I told her there had been a misunderstanding because I hadn't been waiting for her. The confused expression on her face was almost funny, like I had just told her something impossible. She immediately asked what I meant, reminding me that we had agreed to take a break so she could figure things out, and now she had done exactly that, insisting that this was the whole point of taking a break. Apparently, she believed a break worked like pausing a movie, where everything would stay exactly the same until she decided to resume. I calmly explained that I was seeing someone seriously now, Haley, a veterinarian who chose me first instead of treating me like an option after trying everything else. The change in her expression was instant and unpleasant as her confident attitude collapsed into something bitter and hostile. She raised her voice, asking if I was seriously throwing away 4 years together for someone I had just met. And when I repeated Haley's name, she snapped that she didn't care what the girl's name was. She started asking what Haley even knew about me, whether she knew I hated mushrooms or got uncomfortable watching horror movies, and then she went on to criticize Haley's career, claiming veterinarians didn't make much money and that I would struggle financially with someone like that when I could have been with her instead. I told her Haley had chosen me and that I was happy, and that things between Tiffany and me were over. That only made her more upset as she insisted that she had chosen me too and could have stayed with any of those other guys but decided to come back. The claim sounded ridiculous, so I told her she hadn't chosen me at all. She had simply explored her options while keeping me in reserve, and that experience had taught me the difference between being someone's backup plan and being genuinely wanted. She started raising her voice again, arguing that we had 4 years of history together and that I couldn't just throw that away for someone I barely knew. The jealousy was obvious as she kept demanding details about Haley, where we met, how long we had been dating, and even whether we were sleeping together, as if she had some right to inspect my personal life. Then she leaned forward with a bitter expression and accused me of dating Haley just to make her jealous, claiming it was obviously working but predicting that I would get bored within a few months and realize I had thrown away the best thing that had ever happened to me. I simply stared at her, struggling to believe this was the same person I had once planned to propose to. She continued insisting she knew me better than anyone else and questioned whether Haley would tolerate my obsession with fraud cases or care about me the way she supposedly did. Her sense of entitlement was unbelievable because she truly seemed to think that 4 years together gave her a permanent claim over my future regardless of how she had treated me. She even said this was exactly what Ruth had predicted, that I would try to hurt her by dating someone else but would eventually realize my mistake, and then sarcastically congratulated me for succeeding in hurting her. I explained that I was simply trying to build a life with someone who genuinely wanted me from the beginning. She insisted she did want me, saying that was the entire reason she had asked to meet, but I pointed out that she only wanted me now after confirming that I was the safest option left. That clearly frustrated her, and she accused me of being cruel and acting like she had committed some terrible offense when she had only been trying to figure out what she wanted. In her mind, she was somehow the victim in all of this. Eventually, she changed tactics, saying that if I wanted to date a rebound girl just to be petty, then that was my choice, but warned me not to come crawling back to her later when I realized what I had lost. She insisted that once I got bored of pretending to build a life with someone ordinary who didn't challenge me, I would regret this decision. At that point, her thinking seemed completely detached from reality. She finished by saying I was making the biggest mistake of my life and that plenty of other people appreciated what she brought to the table, grabbing her purse as she stood up. Watching her walk away, I realized she had revealed exactly who she had become. Someone who treated love like a negotiation where the other person's feelings were just obstacles to getting what she wanted. On the way home from that dinner, I texted Hunter and told him the meltdown had officially happened and that she genuinely believed I had been sitting around waiting while she finished testing out other guys. His reply came almost instantly, laughing and asking if I had recorded any of it, then telling me he was coming over with drinks because this situation deserved a celebration. In the weeks that followed, watching Tiffany's reaction felt like seeing someone slowly unravel. At first it followed the usual stages, but then drifted into behavior that was honestly disturbing. The first wave was angry messages accusing me of throwing away something real for someone I barely knew, calling me petty and vindictive for refusing her apology, and warning that I would regret everything once the honeymoon phase with Haley ended. After that came the bargaining stage, where she promised she would do anything to prove she was serious about us, including cutting off Brianna and anyone else she now considered toxic influences. When that didn't work, she switched to manipulation. Suddenly Ruth was supposedly worried that I had isolated myself. My mom, who Tiffany definitely had not conveniently run into at Target, was apparently asking about her, and Tiffany herself hinted she was struggling with depression and might need professional help if I didn't give her closure. I ignored every single message, which seemed to drive her even further over the edge. Hunter stayed my voice of reason through the entire mess, joking one night during a gaming session that she was basically sending me the 5 stages of grief through direct messages in real time and seemed permanently stuck on the anger phase. Eventually, the texts went from desperate to completely unhinged and even a little creepy. She started showing up at places she knew I frequented, like the grocery store I usually shopped at, the coffee shop near my apartment, and even Mike's boxing gym, pretending it was a coincidence while trying to force conversations. She began texting screenshots of Haley's Instagram posts with sarcastic comments about how fake Haley looked. Somehow she even figured out Haley's work schedule and started leaving strange comments on the veterinary clinic's social media pages, questioning staff professionalism and asking if they properly screened their employees. When Hunter heard about that, he said she had officially crossed into Psycho X territory and told me to start documenting everything. He insisted I screenshot every text, save every weird comment, and keep records of anything strange she did because he said behavior like that was only a couple steps away from something truly crazy. Things escalated even further when Tiffany created fake Instagram accounts to stalk both of us. She would like old photos from years earlier and then remove the likes minutes later. She watched every story I posted almost immediately after it went up. Using fake usernames, she began following Haley and leaving passive-aggressive comments on her posts. Things like telling her she hoped my boyfriend realized how lucky he was on a hiking photo or making snide remarks about natural beauty and filters under a makeup-free selfie. Haley figured out what was happening right away because she's smart, and instead of feeling intimidated, she decided to respond with humor. When one of the fake accounts commented on a photo of Ziggy asking if my boyfriend helped take care of the dog, Haley replied that I was amazing with animals and far better than her ex's ex, who apparently had an allergy to responsibility. That response only made the fake accounts more aggressive, and the exchanges became brutal in the best way. Haley ended up roasting Tiffany without even knowing who she really was, simply responding to the obvious desperation behind those anonymous profiles with sharp replies that hit exactly where they hurt. The situation finally crossed the line when Tiffany began showing up at Haley's workplace. She would bring in random dogs for consultations and try to question the staff about Haley's schedule, her relationship status, and whether she seemed emotionally stable or just rebounding from something. Haley's co-workers eventually told her about the strange woman asking all these invasive questions, and Haley quickly connected the dots. That's when she gathered screenshots of everything, the fake accounts, the messages, the harassment, and the visits to the clinic, and showed them to me. She told me my ex clearly wasn't just heartbroken anymore, but completely obsessed, and that it was starting to feel unsafe. The situation became even more serious when Tiffany started driving past Haley's apartment building, which Haley caught on the building's security cameras. At that point, we decided it had gone far enough, so I filed for a restraining order. Hunter came with me to the courthouse for support and also because he wanted to witness the moment in person, joking that it felt like Christmas morning watching a crazy ex finally face consequences for stalking behavior. Thankfully, the process for getting the restraining order was fairly straightforward once we presented all the documentation, including screenshots of the fake accounts, security footage showing her driving past Haley's apartment, and statements from Haley's co-workers describing her strange visits to the clinic, all of which clearly showed a pattern of escalating harassment. At the hearing, Tiffany looked terrible, like the stress and obsession had completely drained her. She tried to present herself as the victim, claiming she was only worried about my mental health and suggesting that Haley had somehow manipulated me against my old friends. But the judge clearly didn't believe any of it. The restraining order was granted for 1 year with the option to extend it if necessary, which meant no contact, no interaction on social media, and absolutely no showing up anywhere she knew we might be, with the warning that violating it would lead to immediate arrest. Watching her reaction, it felt like her entire sense of reality had finally collapsed. In less than a year, she had gone from confidently exploring her options to standing in court as the subject of a restraining order. That night, Haley and I went out for dinner to celebrate because it finally felt like we could move forward without constantly worrying about what Tiffany might do next. About 3 months later, Ruth called to let me know Tiffany had moved back to her hometown in South Carolina because the isolation from her friends, the tension at work after the harassment incidents, and the legal expenses had all become too much for her to handle in Charlotte. Ruth said Tiffany was getting help and had finally realized how badly she had messed everything up. I told her that was good and meant it. 6 months after that, Haley and I moved in together. She brought her books, her plants, and her endless love of coffee, while I brought my training gear and the understanding that a relationship shouldn't feel like constant work. Hunter helped us move and, as expected, turned the entire process into a non-stop roast about my lack of organization and Haley's massive book collection. At one point, he picked up a heavy box labeled textbooks and joked about how many veterinary books she possibly needed, asking if she planned to start operating on dinosaurs, which Haley fired back at by reminding him he owned 17 different gaming keyboards and that he had no right to criticize anyone else's collection of specialized equipment. A year later, we got engaged, and the proposal was simple, just the two of us after finishing a morning hike, sweaty, exhausted, and completely certain that choosing each other every day was exactly what we both wanted. When I told Hunter afterward, he joked that it was about time because he had started to think I might end up proposing to my protein powder instead. The boxing crew came to the wedding. Marcus even flew back from a client meeting after his side business took off just to be there. Big Jim handled most of the setup since he could build practically anything, and of course Hunter stood beside me as my best man. His speech was exactly what you would expect from him. a mix of jokes and sincerity, saying he had known me since we were 12 and had only seen me make one truly great decision in life, which was leaving the crazy ex behind and marrying the veterinarian. After the wedding, I received one final message from an unknown number that I knew had to be Tiffany. It simply said she hoped I was happy, admitted she knew she had made a huge mistake, apologized, and congratulated me. I never replied, but I honestly do hope she finds whatever she's looking for in life. Whatever second chances she gets, though, they won't be with me.